Hello, I'm David Zuratzi. I'm a game designer from Mexico and also the chairman of the Layout Project, a project about who wants to professionalize the Mexican game dev industry. Also, I'm the owner of the Those Who Design Studio, and I'm here to talk about diversity. I have thank you to all the team behind Wheel of Games because it's a great space for me and for all the participants from Mexico to be here and to share our points of view about the industry and to meet new friends inside this industry. So let's begin with to talk about the meaning of having a diverse team. Um, I wanted to give this lecture or to have this talk because a lot of times we work with the game dev industry thinking about how it's seen from the Western societies. And it is interesting because Western is a very rich culture who has their own characteristics, but it's not necessarily the same in other parts of the world, especially when we're talking about things that have to touch the cultural heritage differences. Um, I have this example. Western is much more tolerant, is much more respectful with other cultural heritages. And well, I'm from Mexico, so here in Mexico we have a culture that is a syncretic culture, and this means that it's a culture that wash away the culture of the immigrants and wash away the culture of our natives communities at the cost of losing cultural capital, and also it could seem like very nice, hey, it's a culture that integrate everybody well. Yeah, it's cool, but has some problems, and our problems are different from the ones who see we see in contexts like from the US or in Europe. So what we are doing here is to goes from the general characteristics and from all the elements that we could compare to the specific content of how our studio is working this topic of diversity in our laboral context. So let's begin with the distribution of the gender distribution of the employees in the game dev industry versus the gender representation in the games. This is interesting because we could see relation, a direct relation between how much males, females, and queer game developers have the industry versus the representations we have in the games. It seems that it's almost like more or less the same, like it is something very um, direct on how much male developers we have and how much male characters we have. We're talking about like 70% of game developers in the industry and more or less 25, 28 female developers in our industry, and we'll see almost the same numbers in the characters that we have on games. It is slightly different, but we infer from this information is that if we if we want to have a more diverse representation in about gender representation, we should have more women in our industry, and that fits perfectly for some context, and it works fine. But it's not necessary as we're going to see. If we compare the gender distribution in the Mexican industry of game developers, we'll see that we have a little less um, male developers in Mexico than the average from the US from the industry, and a little more female developers than the average of the industry in, um, in the world. But the problem is that it doesn't mean that we have a better representation of the female characters. What happened is that we just make an, a research about how many games had a representation of the LGBT community and from female representations in main characters. And our results are very sad because although we have like 20 games published in Mexico in the last 5 years, we'll just find just one studio who makes LGBT representation, that is Monitor Games, and it's a very special studio because it's a studio that is the only Mexican studio whose complete owners and whose complete directors are female. In the other hand, well, we'll see the only main character written by a woman, and that is a female character um, from the Mexican studio Lienzo in the game Aztec. What's the problem with the Monitor Games representation of women? Well, Monitor Games is a studio who specializes in voice love stories, so the studio doesn't need female representations on their games, but uh, that's not so bad because they are using the queer representation, so they are part of this of giving voice to these minorities in our society. But it's interesting because, well, what happened? Why, if Mexico has a lot more of women working in game dev, we have almost the same representation as a country where we have 100% of male game developers? Well, the problem is not just the numbers. The problem is the part of or the or how we are integrating the women on our industry. A lot of times, we have a lot of female employees, but we don't allow them to have any creative control. Also, we have a sexist laboral culture that is still perpetuated by some women in directive positions. Why? It's not because these women are sexist, it's because the cultural labor is sexist and they don't have any way to broke these power situations. So what they do is just to let it go and make the things goes the same way as they are going this far. So what we could do to change things? Well, we have to give the tools to these underrepresented communities to take care of the directive changes in our studios and to start their own studios. It's not enough to have these numbers. What we need is to have these representatives in specific powers of space because they need the industry to be part of the system of the society as a space for them to tell their stories. And I'm just not thinking about the female or the queer community. I'm thinking about also the indigenous representation and some other underrepresented communities. Um, Now let's go with our team and how we are dealing with this problem. First of all, we were not considered on the studio part of the Mexican game development industry because we are living here in Mexico, but we are not doing games in Mexico. We are part of the communities from Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and Canada. Um, we are not part of the Mexican game dev community. We have another resources, we have another politics, and we have another deals with some other people. That's the first part. The second part is that um, we are different because we have teammates from outside Mexico. Let me show you this. I divide this into geography, into gender, and into interdisciplinary knowledge because that's how we are dealing this. These are the results, and with the results, then we go to the how we got to this. Uh, First of all, in Mexico, we have a presence in three cities, or our teammates live in the different cities. Tijuana at the north of Mexico, it is the border with US. Cancun at the south of Mexico, it is almost the border with Belize. And in Mexico City, the center of Mexico. Another characteristic of our teammates here in Mexico is that we are not from the same region of Mexico. Some people are from Oaxaca, others from Querétaro, the less from Mexico City. So this gives us a different uh, heritage, cultural heritage, backgrounds, and a different point of view about how to understand the video games and understand their way to interact with them. Another interesting thing is that we are working with teammates from Colombia and Argentina. It means that we also have to deal with the cultural heritage of other countries, and it's very interesting because it seems that um, our team has a lot of things to do that works not just for the Mexican community but for the Latin American community. I mean, for example, when we're talking about jokes, a lot of times the comedy is very difficult because when you prepare a joke, it's a lot about be critic of something that is very contextual of someone. So have a multicultural team has to force us to rethink about how to give these interpretations of the culture, interpretations of the language, interpretations of the situation, if we are making a comedy or if we're making something that is more dramatic, in order to be understandable by the whole team and by a widest audience as a result. Other thing that is very interesting is that our studio is just 4 female, 4 male, and 3 non-binary queer participants. And this is very interesting because if we see, it is very different from the average studio. We have a kind of almost asymmetric understanding of the gender distribution. But we'll see next that it is not something that we apply on a policy of hiring on our studio. But this is also giving us a wider point of view of how to make interactions with our characters and how to write characters that could be understandable by the queer community and by a female point of view and by a male point of view, and that could be like, yeah, I think it could be something that could happen. So this is very interesting and important. Other thing that happen when this is when something like this is working is that it becomes a very respectful place to work because it was very easy to understand each other, and it forces us as the four males on the studio to listen to the perspective and the necessities of our teammates. So it was a very interesting exercise. To be honest, I have never thought when I found the studio that it will become something like this. Finally, we have the interdisciplinary diversity. Um, this is very interesting because a lot of people in the studio are working in two of these specialties of the game dev industry. Um, I'm a game designer, but also a graphic designer. Our graphic designer is also a musician, and this gives us a great perspective on how how important is the work of the others for our team. A lot of times we talk about diversity just in terms of cultural and gender, but this is also interesting about thinking diversity. A lot of times I have seen here in Mexico teams that are just full of developers. They could have female developers or queer community developers, but because there are so much developers, is those teams are like kind of close to new ideas and new points of view. Um, this integration of the team allows us to have a double verification on every topic and allow us to give um, more support when we are working on creative process. So now let's go with how it's working inside the studio. Well, we are working with these points, and there are just 3 points that I think are the main point points that support our way of work with diversity. The first of them is that we don't have any special policy about hiring. Uh, what we did is just to bring some criteria, and with these criteria, we select the people without noticing the names or gender or any gap. This blind selection of people led us to have this weird formula of a structure where we have people from all around the LATAM region and from uh, diverse backgrounds. Um, and that was awesome because a lot of times um, we listen to studios that they want to know more about uh, the personal background of their employees, and maybe just in the Mexican context, maybe that's a problem when we are hiring because it allows us to have much more um, prejudice around our hirings. The other thing is that we don't work in the same way as the usual studio in Mexico. A lot of times, what we see in the laboral culture of Mexico is that I'm the boss, I have the money, you have to do what I told you, and that's the point. You have to solve the problems. Well, we work in a methodology that seems more like a mentoring program where we listen first to the ideas of our employees, then we give them the concept, then we work the concept with them, not as a normal boss, but as a mentor, and we provide the tools for our employees to bring those ideas, those concepts to the reality. It also allows them to have enough creative power over the projects to have a personal relation with the project and to bring the best of them into this. And finally, we are full transparent with the process inside the production, and this is very important because when we have this full transparent process implementation, they understand how much budget we have, how we are using this budget, They understand their specific functions, and we are very very clear on what you have to do and what is not your responsibility, and also it works for us the directives. So I cannot uh, evade the responsibility of being the one to pay their uh, to pay their checks, and they cannot elude the responsibility of being the ones who have to create the characters, or they don't have the chance of being confused of how is this working. They know that the project is working with the planation, or when something is going wrong, everybody knows where it's going wrong, why it is going wrong, and everybody could help to uh, to have a better response on this part of the projects. So we never let them down, or they never work on something that they don't know for true. Finally, uh, well, as a conclusion, I think the context is very important for the diversity projects, because we have to understand that not all the contexts are the same, and the diversity should mean something different. The process of social violence that brought the diversity are different from society, and we have to give them specific responses to everyone and bring them the respect they deserve. So, if you want to know anything about the Mexican industry, if you just want to talk, if you just want to ask for some recommendations, if you came to Mexico, or want to talk m- more about how to work with us, you could contact me on Twitter or Instagram, and I could respond to your questions, answer to your questions, or maybe if I don't know something specific about what you are looking for, I can contact you with someone who could uh, could help you about the Mexican dev industry and communities. So thanks again to Natasha and the team of We Love Games. Hope to see you the next year, and hope to talk to you in a few months for more topics about the cultural heritage and diversity, or game design. That is, game design is what I'm the best for. Thanks again.